If the US were to lose its position as a dominant energy supplier to Europe, the effects would ripple across the global energy market in dramatic and unpredictable ways. The immediate impact would be on energy pricing, as Canada steps in to fill the gap left by the US. Europe's energy costs could stabilize, especially since Canada's prices are expected to be more competitive in the long term. The shift could create a more competitive environment in the global energy market, encouraging other nations to explore new avenues for energy partnerships and innovation. One of the broader consequences of this energy shift is the potential for new geopolitical alignments. Europe's move away from the US could lead to a realignment of global alliances, with Canada stepping in as a more reliable partner. The European Union could deepen its economic and energy ties with Canada, shifting the balance of power in North America and globally. As the US faces the possibility of losing market share to Canada, it may need to reconsider its approach to both energy policy and foreign relations to retain its influence over global energy markets. In the longer term, Europe's diversification of energy sources could pave the way for other global players to emerge as more viable alternatives to US exports. Countries in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia may see opportunities to increase their market share in Europe and elsewhere. This diversification could lead to a less centralized global energy market, where no single country holds the dominant position it once did, reducing the ability of major players to dictate terms on a global scale. The US's political instability, reflected in its fluctuating energy policies, could also have broader economic ramifications. Multinational corporations and investors are drawn to stable and predictable trade environments. If Europe's relationship with the US remains erratic, US companies may find themselves at a disadvantage when competing for long-term contracts and partnerships in the energy sector. Businesses and governments alike will seek to reduce risk, and Canada's consistent policy framework will make it an increasingly attractive partner, not only in the energy sector, but also in sectors tied to clean energy technologies, such as electric vehicles, energy storage, and renewable infrastructure. Another potential impact of the US losing influence in Europe's energy market is the ripple effect on the US auto industry. With Canada poised to supply critical minerals for the production of electric vehicle batteries, the US may face challenges in securing the materials needed for its own EV ambitions. Without access to these resources, the US may fall behind in the global race to lead the electric vehicle revolution, which could result in a loss of manufacturing jobs and economic growth. This is a growing concern, especially as the global demand for EVs continues to rise and governments push for stricter emissions standards. In terms of environmental impact, Canada's cleaner energy transition offers Europe the opportunity to further its green goals. As Europe accelerates its shift toward decarbonization, Canada's abundance of clean energy sources like hydropower, solar, and wind is aligned with Europe's sustainability targets. This deeper collaboration could enhance both regions' efforts in achieving net zero emissions by 2050, potentially creating a sustainable energy corridor between the two. However, this shift also places pressure on the US to address its own energy transition. With the loss of European energy markets, the US may face an economic downturn in the energy sector unless it adapts quickly to global changes. The US government may find itself forced to embrace more sustainable energy practices and develop long-term policy stability if it hopes to retain its role as a key player in the global energy landscape. The ongoing trade tensions between the US and Canada could further complicate matters. As both countries lock horns over tariffs and trade policy, their relationship could become strained, pushing Canada to diversify even more rapidly and shift its energy focus away from the US. Canada's growing economic ties with China and other Asian markets only add to the complexity of US-Canada relations. If Canada succeeds in expanding its energy trade with China and other Asian countries, it could cement its position as a significant global player, further diminishing the US's role in shaping the international energy market. This shift in energy alliances, if sustained, could set a new precedent in how countries approach energy security, trade, and geopolitical influence. If Canada's model of stable trade relations and commitment to sustainability proves successful, it could challenge the US's long-standing role as the global energy hegemon. Over time, this could result in a more diversified and less predictable global energy market, one in which the US may have to adapt to a less dominant role, forcing a re-evaluation of its geopolitical strategy. The question then becomes, can the US recover from this shift and regain its energy influence over Europe? The answer likely depends on how the U.S. responds to these challenges. To do so, the U.S. will need to provide more consistency in its energy policies, work on enhancing relations with key global partners, and invest in new technologies that align with global sustainability goals. Whether the U.S. can adapt to this new energy reality will determine whether it can maintain its position as a global energy power, or whether this new era of energy cooperation will favor Canada and other emerging players in the market. The global energy landscape is evolving, and the U.S.'s role in it is at a crossroads. As tensions between the U.S. and Canada escalate, the potential long-term ramifications for both nations and the global economy become even more pronounced. The U.S. is facing a critical crossroads, with the need to balance its energy security and economic stability against the desire to exert more control over its trading partners. Canada, on the other hand, is carefully navigating these challenges by not only considering its energy exports, but also its broader economic strategy, looking to minimize its dependence on the U.S. and strengthen its own position in global markets. Should Canada decide to leverage its oil exports as a strategic tool, the U.S. would be forced to reconsider its reliance on Canadian energy, and this could prompt more significant shifts in how the U.S. approaches energy production domestically. While the idea of ramping up U.S. shale oil production remains a part of the conversation, the reality is that shale oil is more expensive and environmentally damaging, which could limit its effectiveness in the long run. Plus, there's the question of how sustainable such an approach would be, both environmentally and economically. Another factor in this equation is the potential role of other global players. With OPEC, Russia, and China already eyeing opportunities to manipulate oil prices in their favor, the disruption of the U.S.-Canada energy supply chain could create a vacuum that these countries would likely be eager to fill. If OPEC and its allies increase their influence, it could further destabilize global energy markets, sending oil prices spiraling and leaving the U.S. more vulnerable to external pressures. Similarly, countries like China might move to negotiate their own energy deals with Canada or other suppliers, further complicating the landscape for U.S. energy and trade policy. The ripple effects of these tensions aren't confined to just the energy sector. The U.S. economy is deeply interconnected with Canadian imports in numerous industries. From agriculture to manufacturing, the U.S. benefits from the steady flow of Canadian goods. If this supply chain is disrupted, it could lead to a significant decline in the availability of essential products, raising prices for consumers and putting small businesses at risk of closure. As inflation continues to rise, this strain on production and supply lines could make it even harder for everyday Americans to manage their cost of living, particularly in the face of a potential recession. The trade war also poses significant risks for American consumers. If U.S. businesses face higher costs due to tariffs and retaliatory measures, these increased costs will inevitably be passed down to consumers. With prices for goods climbing, the U.S. could see a sharp increase in the cost of living, which would further amplify the strain on the economy. In fact, the tourism sector, which has long relied on Canadian visitors, could also face a downturn as Canadians cut back on travel to the U.S. due to increased costs and strained relations. While the Trump administration faces a dilemma in responding to these tensions, it is also confronted with the broader challenge of managing the long-term economic fallout. If the U.S. pushes forward with its tariffs and continues to escalate the conflict, it risks creating a cycle of retaliation that could destabilize both countries and ripple out into the global economy. Conversely, negotiating a new deal with Canada would not only stabilize energy supplies, but could also serve as a model for future trade relations. However, such a deal would require careful diplomacy and compromise, something that has been in short supply during recent trade negotiations. Canada, for its part, is taking a bold stance. The boycott campaign it has launched is not merely symbolic. It's a direct challenge to U.S. trade practices. By encouraging Canadians to support local goods and reduce their reliance on American imports, Canada is signaling to the U.S. that it will not passively accept aggressive trade measures. The removal of American-made alcohol from store shelves in Quebec and Nova Scotia serves as a powerful symbol of Canada's readiness to defend its sovereignty and economic interests, even at the cost of economic discomfort. This energy standoff and trade war are shaping up to be a defining moment in global trade relations. For the U.S., the stakes are high. Beyond the immediate consequences of rising energy prices, disruptions to supply chains, and the potential for a manufacturing crisis, this conflict could have a lasting impact on the country's standing in the global energy and trade markets. For Canada, this is an opportunity to assert itself on the world stage, diversify its economic partnerships, and create new avenues for growth that don't depend entirely on its southern neighbor. As the US and Canada continue to clash over energy supplies and trade policies, the future of their economic relationship remains uncertain. But what is clear is that this conflict will shape the global economic landscape in ways that extend far beyond these two nations. The world will be watching closely to see how both sides navigate this high-stakes standoff and what the ultimate resolution will mean for the balance of power in the global energy market. Will the US maintain its energy dominance, or will Canada succeed in shifting the balance of power? This unfolding drama is one that will have far-reaching consequences for years to come.